was a time when the Democratic Party did stand for the working people of the United States. Now there's a new playbook. Obama perfected it. Say the right things. Say you really support labor, and then maybe they will be distracted and they won't recognize what you're actually doing.
Let's just jump right into our conversation with Marianne Williamson. Marianne Williamson is a best-selling author, political activist, and spiritual thought leader. She is the founder of a nonprofit organization that began during the AIDS crisis to help people suffering from the disease that has delivered more than 14 million meals. She is a spiritual counselor, too, and has been a frequent guest of Oprah. She ran for president in 2020 and is running again in 2024, but most importantly for her resume, she is today's guest on the Valley Labor Report. Marianne, welcome to the program and thanks for taking the time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
So, you've been making the rounds a lot lately and you've been in the news a lot. I, was going through your website, taking a look at where you have shown up in the news. And a lot of these interviews are hitting really good and similar things. What your platform is, why you're running, do you have a chance, are you a spoiler, things like that. We're going to go over some of those things, but in thinking about how we would make this as useful as possible for our audience, what I want to do is talk about some of that stuff that I haven't seen anyone else ask you, and maybe dive a little bit deeper into things of particular concern for our audience. Does that sound good? Awesome. So, and for folks who aren't familiar with Marianne, I recommend checking out the following: Max Alvarez's interview with her on the Real News Network. He's a friend of the show, and that interview was really great. Her campaign launch speech really lays out kind of her vision for the presidency and why she's running. So definitely would recommend checking that out. She was on the Breakfast Club a while ago. That's another good interview that she's done. And her website has a laundry list of priorities in areas like children, crime prevention, criminal justice, the economy, education, health, and labor. And most of these sections really include pretty significant detail and a lot of specific things that I'm supportive of, some of which we're going to talk about today, but we certainly won't be able to get to all of it. So recommend checking out your website. That'll be our homework to the audience. And at least check it out before you go vote in the primary next year.
So I want to open our discussion by talking about the state of the country. Across beliefs and demographics, there really seems to be a widespread sense of alienation and despair. There seems to be a sense that our society is profoundly sick, that our social fabric is breaking down, and we can see the trend of increased mental illness, the increases in deaths of despair, and the loneliness reported by so many. I heard Max Alvarez in his interview with you talk about a nightmarish deja vu, and I thought that was a great way of putting it. And I'll borrow from some song lyrics from Father John Misty and say that there's a sense that everything is getting worse while staying eerily the same. And again, this seems to cut across beliefs and demographics, though of course there's obviously wildly different perspectives about what all this means or what's behind it all. But it does seem, in my assessment, that there appears to be a moral crisis, a spiritual crisis even in this country, as we try to survive a society that is engineered around exploitation and oppression, as we try to survive a rigged economy, corrupt politics, a poisoned environment, a collapsing climate. Personally, I figure the only way out is a working class movement rooted in love, justice, and solidarity, and one powerful enough to bring real democratic transformation. So I'm curious to hear your response, Ms. Williamson, and if you could talk about the state of the American people and, the spiritual energy in this country right now, what it means and how we move forward.
My response is yes, you're right. Absolutely. 1,000%. I have dedicated my life to the moral and spiritual dimensions of that crisis in an individual's life, as well as society's. And I came to the point of realization, partly because the society changed during the trajectory of my career, that you cannot separate the moral and the spiritual crisis from the economic crisis, and for all the reasons that you said. I'm older, and I think the older you are, you're sort of the keeper of the stories. When I was in my 20s, there was still a sense of hope. You didn't have to have a lot of money to be able to live in an apartment and just sort of have a sense that I could make it too if I work hard. In the 1970s, remember, we had a thriving middle class. And there was a sense, not that you said to yourself, oh, the society sets me up to succeed, but that was the kind of sense you got because you didn't feel thwarted. Remember, the average worker in the 70s could afford a house, could afford a car, could afford a yearly vacation, could afford to send their kids to college. So those of us who were in our 20s looked forward to that and assumed that we could have that too. I watched this country change. I watched what trickle-down economics did. I watched what Reagan was doing. I watched the trajectory of what came to be hyper-capitalism, the dog-eat-dog world that it created, how so many people are living in a kind of economic survival that, of course, this perverts you psychologically and emotionally. Debt is crippling. We have 1 in 4 Americans who live with medical debt. So I saw it change, and I saw it change in all the ways that you said. And if you continue to try to address the spiritual and the moral crisis that is produced by so much of this atomization, which is produced by so much of hypercapitalism, then yes, you are doing good work. However, what I came to understand is that no amount of spiritual counseling or private charity can compensate for a basic lack of social justice. So we are exactly where you described, and America is in decline. Now the issue is for us to face that and to lift it back up. But we can't lift it back up unless we're willing to face what it is. And I thought you described it quite eloquently.
And what you said about, there's no amount of individual spiritual counseling or, psychologizing that can really bring us out of this as a society. That's something that I resonate with a lot. My wife is a therapist, and, she has to deal with a lot of the, a lot of the issues that our society creates in children as she goes and talks to children in schools in the area about their lives and the issues that they have to deal with. But she is, she's one person, and her team is only a few people, and there's only so much you can do when, after your hour-long counseling session, no matter how nice you can make them feel in the moment or how prepared you can make them in that moment, they have to go back to a home that is impoverished, or a home with parents who don't have access to good paying union jobs, right? Who are really on the margins of society, and that's something that I think that a lot of people and it's interesting. There was an Intercept article about you that they said that you kind of merged Bernie Sanders' politics with an early version of Jordan Peterson's self-help stuff. And that's where, people who really get into that Jordan Peterson type stuff, they just totally forget that there's a society around us, right? We are not as much as society wants to atomize us and individualize us, we do live in a society, and things happen in a certain context, and we can't address it if we can't address people's individual problems if we don't address the societal problems.
Well, I don't think the comparison to Jordan Peterson is very correct, except maybe that very, very early phase when he was telling people to get up and not be
right.
a slacker and stuff like that. My work is more spiritual, and I believe in miracles, but you have to create the conditions for the miraculous to occur. And that relates to a society as much as it relates to an individual. And, I heard somebody say something the other day that I thought was really interesting. He said, I knew we were going down a bad path when I heard Ronald Reagan say, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? He said, because before then there had been a sense, are we better off than we were 4 years ago? So as long as we fail to reclaim a sense that this is a collective sickness, individuals can make it. Individuals We have gotten to a point, which is better than was true when I was growing up. We've gotten to a point where if you were talented enough, if you were brilliant enough, creative enough, if you have something special going on, no matter who you are, what race, what ethnicity, you probably can make it in America, which is different than when I was growing up. However, the point is you shouldn't have to be any of those things to live a dignified life in the United States. So even if that person was not a psychologist, even if that person was a minister or a rabbi or a mom or a particular coach and, helping kids because they can be great at sports, or that, helping kids that could be great at music or whatever. I think the point we have to face here is the rigging of the system in such a way that the vast majority of people do remain locked out of what is basically a prosperity machine of the U.S. economy. And that machinery should be available to anyone who works hard enough. And some of the people are locked out of that before they're even 10 years old.
And, and we're going to talk about some of the specific ways that you want to try to address these societal issues in a bit. But before we get to that, I'm interested in some of the way that you came to that kind of opinion and realization about the need to address these societal issues, and I wonder if it comes from your familial background, and this is something that I've seen on your website, and I've never seen anybody talk to you about it, which is kind of bizarre to me because it's fascinating to me. You say that your father was a labor organizer with the CIO, that he was part of the UAW's campaign to organize Ford plants in 1937. Your grandfather worked on Rock Island Railroad and took your father to hear Eugene Debs speak. Your brother worked for Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers, and you say that played an important role in kind of shaping how you view the world. Can you talk to us about what it was like growing up in an environment like that, and how those people affected you?
Well, I've actually talked a lot about my father. I grew up in a very typical liberal Jewish democratic home, actually. But America was different in those days. I'll give you an example. My mother's family was very different politically than my father was. So there would be a family breakfast right in my grandmother's house. And my uncles would say to us things like, "Don't listen to your father. You'll never make any money." And then my father would say, "Don't listen to your uncles, kids. They will not survive the revolution." And then my mother would come in and say, "Okay, who wants roast beef? Who wants whitefish?" That was America. We had these conversations. We weren't like that. This was America. These were the conversations on the table. And I think about that now and I think, wow, how different America is. As a matter of fact, I have felt, and I've heard other people say the same, I'm glad my parents didn't live to see what has happened to this country, because it would have broken their hearts. And that's how I feel about both my parents. So yeah, when I was growing up, I remember my parents saying, if you ever cross a picket line, don't even think about coming home. But I think the most important anecdote is, I don't remember if I was in my 20s or my 30s, and I was with some girlfriend and some friend in the car. And I remember we were going somewhere and I saw a picket line and I said to her, "Oh, we can't go in. There's a picket line." And she said, "Oh, no, it's okay. You just kind of go around the line." And I looked at her and she said it with such innocence. I realized she was raised in a very different home, but it wasn't just that she was raised in a different home. She was raised at a different time, because when I was growing up, and I grew up in Texas, and there were a lot of conservatives, obviously, even then, even though it was more of a democratic state. It was just understood that you didn't cross a picket line. And I saw what happened. That goes back to what I said before. I saw this country change. I saw the demonization of labor that took place as part of the systematic rigging of our economy. The 80s was an amazing time of fundamental change, and we have to turn it back. That's all. We've had an aberrational chapter of American history. And I think that what I want to do as a candidate, but also what I want to do as president, is to help this country look in the mirror. You know, every generation of people individuates. Every individual does. And what do you do when you grow up? You know, you're talking about your wife being a therapist. You look at your parents, you look at your family system, and you say, okay, what did my parents do that was right? What do I want to extend and pass that on to my kids and hopefully even do better? And you look at other things and you say, that stops here. I'm breaking the chain with that one. And that's what this generation of Americans needs to do. When I say generation, I mean all of us who are adults, whether you're 18 or 80. We need to recognize that this last really 50 years of trickle-down economics, neoliberalism, corporatism, hypercapitalism, it doesn't really matter what we call it. But for us to realize that a $50 trillion transfer of wealth, this focus on money for the stockholder as opposed to and at the expense of all other stakeholders, particularly the workers, has led to a devastating chapter that we are now in. And it is tanking us. It is literally tanking us. You cannot overestimate the role that economic despair plays in this mental health crisis. No, the mental health crisis is not just about what's going on in the brain. A lot of what's going on in the brain is because of what's going on in the world. That includes the state of our food. It includes the state of our water. It includes the state of our earth. It includes the state of our climate. It includes our foreign policy. It includes the fact that people can't afford an education or to send their kids. The fact that people can't afford their medicine. 18 million people who can't even afford to fulfill their prescriptions. People rationing their insulin, putting GoFundMe pages up on the internet so that they can afford to pay for operations that some greedy insurance company has said that they or their loved ones cannot have. This is not going to change unless we change it. We cannot look at this as simply fighting this issue here or this issue there. We're always playing whack-a-mole. It's an all systems breakdown. I agree with you that we need a political revolution, and I believe I agree with you that labor is crown jewel, but it goes across all sectors of society and all elements, and it does have to do with our realizing that it is now baked into the cake. The status quo will not disrupt itself. It's not a surprise to me that whether it's me or Bobby Kennedy or Cornel West, what is the one thing we all have in common? We're not part of that system. That system's not putting up a candidate who wants to really break the chain that binds us and that binds the majority of Americans economically. They're not going to do it. And everybody who's working within that system, even the most progressive voices, are locked in. They're not going to say it. They're not going to run for president saying it. Why? Their committee assignment might be taken away from them. Their chances for 28 will be diminished. It's got to be somebody coming in and saying, we're gonna change this thing. There needs to be an intervention, just like you intervene with a drug addict. There has to be an intervention. The status quo will not disrupt itself. We, the people, must disrupt the system. You cannot do that. You cannot do that without a revitalized labor movement, which is starting to happen, which is the same thing that happened in the first Gilded Age. And we're now in the second Gilded Age. And what you're seeing is the reiteration of this. It's amazing. You were talking about Max Alvarez, Christian Smalls, what's happening, the baristas, what's happening at Amazon, what's happening with the writer's strike in Los Angeles and New York. People are getting it. This is all part of an awakening that's going on. Now people need to be willing to make the transition, to realize it has to be an inside and an outside strategy. I'm not saying that electing a president or anyone else who gets it is going to be enough, but neither is it enough to just work on the outside. We need an inside-outside strategy. Those of us running for office need to support the movements, but the movements, I think, need to support the candidates who, if given the levers of power, would open the door and let them in.
And, I also think that a revitalized labor movement is key to really any sort of large-scale changes in our society, and that's how we've seen them come about in the past. And, as individuals, there is only so much we can do, like not crossing a picket line. That's really kind of the bare minimum that you talked about doing. But, as a president, like you said, there are ways that you can bring labor into the, in the door, so to speak, and support workers from that office. And, when it comes to labor, Biden has said that he's the most pro-union president of our lifetimes, and certainly I think some leadership in our unions are going to say that, and I think to the extent that it is true, it's not so much that he's so great about labor, it's that the bar is just that low. He is willing to say union is a positive word. That's great. We've been pretty impressed here on this show with Jennifer Abruzzo, generally speaking, at the NLRB. But aside from that, there has really been a lack of action. And being in Alabama, I can't help but think, in the context of a president supporting labor, of the coal miners' strike in Brookwood that just ended after almost 2 years, where they were fighting against, international private equity companies that owned Warrior Met Coal. And the lack of action from the administration was really appalling to us. There were no statements made. I saw in Birmingham, the Department of Labor Secretary, Marty Walsh, come to tout the infrastructure bill and be asked to his face for support from miners, and nothing came of that. Nothing came of that at all. He didn't even take the time to go a few steps down the road and be on the picket line with them. And, we expect that from Republicans here in Alabama, even though it's gross how they throw up coal miners in their ads and don't do anything for them when, they go up against BlackRock. But, we would like to be able to expect more from a Democratic administration. And so how would a Williamson administration have responded to a strike like that, one that ended up lasting, like I said, nearly 2 years before the union called the strike off without a contract?
There was a time when the Democratic Party did stand in unequivocal advocacy for the working people of the United States. Now there's a new playbook. I think Obama perfected it. And Biden is very definitely in the same playbook. Say the right things. Say the right things. Say you really support labor. And then maybe they will be distracted and they won't recognize what you're actually doing. Do just enough. Do just enough. Raise the minimum wage for the federal workers. But then when you try to put it in the whole bill and the parliamentarian says, no, oh, that's great. That's convenient. So we can just stop there. The railroad workers, who only wanted sick pay. Marty Walsh, what you just said. At what point are we going to end our codependent relationship with the Democratic elite and realize what's happened here? What they want to do is they want to do what they can on the periphery, but they won't go so far as to do anything that challenges the fundamental underlying corporate forces that make the continuation of all this suffering inevitable. So that's where I believe we need to get. Stop thinking that the Democratic elite is going to do anything for you on that level. What I would do as president is I would cancel every union busting company that the U.S. got a contract with every union busting company day one. I would make sure that not only every company, but every company that has a contract with a company that has a contract with the U.S. government has to give $15 an hour to its workers. And let's not forget, $15 an hour is not enough. In many cities in this country, it takes $24, $25 an hour to really be a living wage. And Franklin Roosevelt said that a company that does not pay its workers a living wage is a company that does not deserve to exist. Half the workers in this country cannot afford a one-bedroom apartment. 1/3 of American workers live on less than $15 an hour and can't afford a place to live. We have over 3 million people getting eviction notices every year. Many of these people are working people. Many of our homeless, people living in their cars. So the message here is, we are way past time when incremental changes should be taken as acceptable. And like you said, the bar is so low. We're begging. We are saying to the Democratic elite, "Thank you for the cookie," because the Republicans only give you crumbs. But these Democratic elite establishment are giving you cookies. You can't live on a cookie either. You live on nourishing food, and nourishing food is a decent living wage for a dignified job. And that's why I have an economic Bill of Rights.
And you mentioned the rail workers just a moment ago, and that is something perhaps with a little bit more national resonance that has really disappointed a lot of union members, even people that are disposed to support Biden. And we've seen in our comments section rail workers telling us that they're going to be voting for Trump in 2024 because of the strike breaking that Joe Biden engaged in with the support of Democrats in the Congress. And so, we would disagree with that electoral strategy about voting for Trump. But, that's Biden's fault, right? Because it's how do you he has not even given us anything to work with. If I'm talking to a rail worker and let's say we live in a world where Jacob wants to try to convince them to vote for Biden in a general election, he just hasn't given me anything to work with, particularly for rail workers. And so, can we assume that a Williamson administration would not engage in that kind of behavior during negotiations like that?
I'm running against him. I'm his opponent. That's the whole point. And if you don't, I firmly believe there are a lot of people like those who have told you, to hell with us, I'm voting for Trump. What I'm saying to you is I don't want to say that the president wouldn't win again because I don't want to sort of put that in the air, but then vote for someone different. We have this codependent relationship with continuing to talk about what the Democrats are offering. What they're offering is not enough. It has not been enough for us, and it is not enough to win in 2024. Let's talk about the option. So when you say, what would the Democratic Williamson administration do? Yes, we would make sure that we pass the PRO Act. Yes, we would cancel the contracts with the union busting companies. Yes, Franklin Roosevelt said, it has become obvious to me, he said clear, that we must become fairly radical for a generation. Now, when I say radical, I mean radically American. But the Democratic Party is trying to have it both ways. And I don't believe the Democratic Party should be trying to have it both ways. The Democratic Party today is not the Democratic Party, but the Democratic elite, establishment elites in the Democratic Party today are what the Republicans were when I was growing up.
It definitely, I've seen flyers from young Republican committees talking about, the importance of going to your union meeting. And that's just something that you would never see here. And in fact, when Tupperville was running against Doug Jones, he took out an ad in a local newspaper here saying that Tupperville would stand up to big labor. As if this is something that people are concerned about here in rural North Alabama, is having a senator that right. Yeah, I would love to have a big labor in this country that actually pulls the strings. And
when Biden won in 2020, who wanted to be his Secretary of Labor, don't you?
Yeah. Yes.
And he chose Marty Walsh. That says everything.
Yeah. And something that we can never say often enough, Howard Schultz was Hillary Clinton's reported pick to be Secretary of Labor. And we see what Howard Schultz is doing with his workers right now. And one more question on labor that I'm interested in your take on is that over the past several decades that you've been talking about the rise of whatever we want to call it, hyper-capitalism, neoliberalism, we've seen law enforcement organizations at the federal and state levels be chronically underfunded. And I'm not talking about the police, the people that are going to pull you over when you're going down the street or, harass you if they don't like the way that you look. I'm talking about the agencies that enforce laws that benefit workers at the expense of bosses. Organizations like the Department of Labor, like the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, like the Mine Safety and Health Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Labor Relations Board. Every one of these organizations have devastating numbers that they can reel off to you. And the summary of all of it is that they have more work than they ever have in the history of their organization, and they have less resources than they ever have in the history of their organization. So how would you make it a priority for Congress to fully fund these organizations?
President presents her budget. And when listen, no matter who the president is, you hope for members of the House who support your agenda. You hope for a Senate that supports your agenda. Obviously, people need to not only, if the agenda of what I am suggesting is to someone's liking, then you not only have to support my candidacy, but support on a primary level more congressional and senatorial candidates as well. Remember, the crushing of progressive candidates occurs not only on a presidential level, but definitely on a congressional level as well. So obviously, the goal here ultimately is to get enough people in Congress who will actually support the kind of agenda in which there will be more funding for the NLRB, there will be more funding for the EPA, there will be more funding for the FDA, there will be more funding for these things that actually support people. Underfunding these agencies, capturing these agencies by corporate forces is the agenda of the hyper-capitalist neoliberal forces. So having a president who gets that and will say that and will lay it down and will tell the American people what's really going on is important, but it's not the only thing. So yes, getting a president in there who will say it like it is and say, we need this money, and will actually expose when that money is not giving. We'll say it in something like a State of the Union, say, well, what we really need is more money for the NLRB. What we really need is more money for OSHA. What we really need is more money for the Labor Department. But my fellow Americans, we couldn't get it from this Congress. Why? Because they're not working for your health, safety, and well-being so much as they're working for their corporate donors. We need a president who would say that in the State of the Union and then see what happens.
I appreciate your time here, and we'll wrap up with what I see as the two big elephants in the room regarding your candidacy. And, for other policy specifics, like I said, you've been on several programs, given, speeches, and you have a really detailed website. I would recommend folks check that out. But to wrap up here, I want to give you some time to address those two. And the first one is I think your past history as something of a spiritual advisor or a self-help guru, which many people actually like. We have even had some listeners come to us and say that the reason they're interested in your campaign is from your appearances on Oprah and reading your books and how much you have helped them in the past. But others have the opposite reaction. They're kind of turned off by it. And we've had other folks just on the opposite end of the spectrum reach out and say that questioning your candidacy because of those very things. And I'll just read you one comment that we got because I think it's representative, and I think it'll be helpful for you to be able to address that directly. And this person told us, initially, we really liked her because one of the videos she did was a really good one about America's mental health crisis. And she said a lot of really good things in it that I'm not used to hearing politicians say. But ultimately, we got a little weirded out by her because we learned that she's apparently into magical healing crystals, and I'm fairly certain that's not the case, but that's an opinion that's out there, and other really bizarre and ethically questionable forms of alternative medicine. How would you talk to a person that has come by one way or another to that opinion of you?
It's a shame that so where did they get that information? I mean, hello. So I have 14 books that are out there. There are so many videos of my lectures, etc. You'll never find in any of those books any talk about healing crystals. You'll never find in any of my talks that you'll see on the video of me using healing crystals or magical thinking to heal people. Why do I know that? Because it doesn't exist. Now, let's be real about the kinds of things that you and I have been talking about on this program today. We're very aware, and I would think that the person who wrote you that note would be aware that there is tremendous institutional resistance to conversations like you and I are having actually being translated into effective political power. So they say it's a form of character assassination. It's a form of creating whatever narrative would throw fairy dust in people's eyes. So ask me about something I've said, because I've never said anything about healing crystals, and I've never said anything about magical thinking. So how do I, it's kind of like one of those, when was the last time you beat your wife?
Right.
How can I defend myself for something that didn't happen? And I know that those narratives have been created, and those narratives are created, and it's just ridiculous, but it's not ridiculous because people hear it and think it's true. I think there are a lot of people who would like to think that they are not vulnerable to disinformation. Sure are when it comes to me. But, like they say, do your own research. Actually read my books. Pick up any of my books and see if I say anything like that. Look at any of my texts, any of my videos. There's so many of them out there. See if I say anything like that, and you won't find it.
And I think that one good place actually to kind of see somebody stumbling over trying to accuse you of that is your interview with Sean Hannity, because he read a quote from one of your books or speeches or something that was said in different words, but is actually very theologically Christian about not feeling at home in this world. And I remember growing up in the church and singing a hymn to that effect about, I'm not home here and all this stuff. And you said, I don't know. I thought that's something that a lot of Christians would actually agree with. And he kind of stumbled over himself and was like, oh, yeah, now that I think about it, you're right. Actually, that is something I agree with. So never mind. And so
something I wanted to point out was that that is the irony. If you read my books, I speak about the religious and spiritual themes at the heart of all the great religious systems. But they're all pretty traditional. I mean, my spiritual beliefs are pretty traditional. We must love one another, be merciful, forgive, be compassionate, walk humbly. That's pretty traditional stuff.
I would tend to agree. And so the last thing that we'll let you answer, and then we'll let you go. We appreciate your time. Is and that's the other elephant in the room that I think is more important to me, and even for folks who like you, is the long shot nature of your campaign. Being a union member, union endorsements are important to me, and many unions have actually already endorsed Biden, which is something that we had a segment about on our show saying that was a bad idea. And the ones that haven't aren't really likely to endorse anybody else in the primary, and so. What are you doing to court union endorsements, or at least encourage them to kind of stay out of the race? Have you received any union endorsements yet? And why should union members and other working folks donate time and money, their limited resources, to your campaign? What is the theory to win, I guess, or at least affect change? Is there one policy in particular that maybe you're hoping to get Biden to adopt because of this campaign? I'm interested in your response to that.
Biden will not adopt more pro-labor policies than he has now. What I would hope is that people would do their civic responsibility, look at the agenda of the president, look at my agenda, clearly on my website, Marianne2024.com, as it pertains to labor and everything else, an economic bill of rights and so forth. Look at the agenda of anyone else who's running, and then make a mind and heart filled decision. The person who will win is the person who is supported. I mean, Donald Trump supposedly had no chance of winning back in 2016. The issue is we have been trained in this country to limit our political imaginations. She can't win. Of course they want you to think that. That's kind of like, oh, she uses healing crystals. I'll win if I get the votes. I'll get the votes if I'm supported. So I've heard people say that. I heard some environmental activists said something similar. Somebody, a friend of mine who is big in the environmental movement, said, how can you support Biden after he approved the Willow Project? How can you support Biden after he gave more drilling permits than even Trump did? And so this person said, well, what else have we got? I felt so erased. I felt so invisible. I've said I would cancel the Willow Project on day one. It's a mind thing that's been done to all of us. And part of claiming our power is using it. This is a primary, by the way. This is a primary. So if you vote for a person, if you want to, if you think that Biden is going to ultimately win anyway, which, you know, if you want to look at reasonable predictive factors, that would be, understandable. Vote for someone in the primary who, should they get enough votes, even if they do not defeat him, by standing for the policies you believe in, will have more influence. So when you say to me, how do I expect to agitate? How do I expect to influence the president? My question goes back to the voter. How do you expect to do it? I'm doing it by running. By you voting for me, you are upping the conversation that the president would then have to look at and go, wow, a lot of people want that agenda.
I think that's reasonable, and we've had internationals of local unions who advertise and sponsor the show who have endorsed Biden, and so I can imagine that there might be some consternation with this interview, perhaps, but I hope people will listen to it with an open mind, and like you said, do your civic responsibility. I think that it is important for people to actually know who and what they're voting for, and what the ramifications of that is going to be. So Marianne Williamson, I really appreciate your time. Is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap up here?
No, I think it's great. I think what you're doing is great. I agree with everything, that you guys were saying at the very beginning of this conversation. America's in trouble, and it's like a ship that's listing to the side. We need universal health care. We need tuition-free college and tech schools. We need free childcare. We need paid family leave. We need a guaranteed living wage. We need a guaranteed sick pay. We need an economic bill of rights, but we're not going to have these things until and unless we support candidates who stand for them, and stand for them passionately and vocally. And if all of us work together, we can have that, but we have to make it happen.
Marianne Williamson, candidate for the presidential nomination in the Democratic Party. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you later.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.
All right, folks, we appreciate you listening, and there has been a lot of conversation in the chat, and hope you understand that we are not that we weren't able to get to all that. We had some questions that we felt were important that we wanted to ask her. Appreciate your
we had
patience.
a whole lot of questions. Believe me, we had plenty of questions. We could have done many more. So there was a lot we didn't talk about. For example, foreign policy is an issue that I really like to talk about. We didn't really get into, but maybe another time, and maybe down the road. But yeah, I really appreciate everyone who's been tuning in this morning. Appreciate your time, and like Jacob said, I hope everyone just listens with an open mind, and that's why we talk to candidates on this show. We've talked to a diverse cast of characters on this show, everyone from Republicans to communists and everything in between. So we try to have a diverse crew of folks that come and speak to us, so that we can just hear what folks have to say, and try to have dialogue that's helpful and relevant to working people in the South.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody, so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.